The conference hall of the Golden Palace Hotel in Del City was decorated with white lilies and elegant golden ribbons. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating a solemn atmosphere. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the guests took their seats, awaiting the start of the wedding ceremony of Hendrik Wilson and Kalmina Jackson. Hendrik stood at the altar, tall and stately, in an impeccably tailored dark blue suit. His eyes betrayed a certain tension, which most guests attributed to pre-wedding jitters. Next to him stood 2 friends, who periodically patted the groom on the shoulder in a sign of support. When the wedding march began to play, everyone turned toward the doors of the hall. Kalmina appeared accompanied by her father, the gray-haired Dr. Jackson, whose reputation in Del City was impeccable. The bride looked stunning in an ivory dress that elegantly accentuated her slender figure. Her hand-embroidered veil fell to the floor, creating the impression of an ethereal being floating above the earth. The priest began the ceremony and the hall fell into reverent silence. Hendrik and Kalmina stood facing each other, reciting their vows. "I, Hendrik Wilson, take you, Kalmina Jackson." At that moment, the doors burst open with a loud bang. Standing in the doorway was a young woman in a tight-fitting black dress. Her face was contorted with anger and pain. She was holding an opaque bottle in her hands. "You liar, Hendrik!" she shouted, rushing toward the altar. "You promised me everything! You said you loved me." The guests froze in shock. The guard at the door tried to stop the uninvited guest, but she deftly dodged him. Several people rose from their seats, not understanding what was happening. "Lucia, don't!" Hendrik gasped, taking a step back. Lucia Brooks stopped a few steps away from the couple. Her slender fingers gripped the bottle so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "If I can't have you, then no one can," she said with frightening calm as she unscrewed the cap. The next few seconds stretched into eternity. Lucia made a sharp movement with her hand, and the liquid from the bottle flew towards the newlyweds. The first drops hit Hendrik's face, and the air was filled with his terrifying scream. Kalmina instinctively raised her hands to protect herself, but the acid burned her wrists and neck. The hall erupted in panic. The screams of the guests, the sound of chairs being knocked over, and the cries of women created a chaotic symphony of horror. Lucia stood motionless, watching the result of her actions with a strange look of satisfaction on her face. Hendrik fell to his knees, covering his face with his hands. Blood seeped through his fingers. Kalmina, moaning in pain, was surrounded by her bridesmaids, who tried to help her. Kalmina's father, Dr. Jackson, instantly switched into professional mode, shouting about the need for clean water to wash her. Security finally reacted, restraining Lucia and knocking the bottle out of her hands. She did not resist, but continued to look at Hendrik with an expression that mixed hatred and love. Detective Henry Morgan arrived at the scene 20 minutes after the call. By that time, the victims had already been taken away by ambulance, and most of the guests were in shock, giving initial statements to the patrol officers. Henry was an African American of medium height, with a sturdy build and attentive eyes that seemed to notice everything. He wore an inconspicuous dark suit and carried a worn leather notebook in which he recorded all the details of his investigations. "What do we have here?" he asked, addressing a young patrol officer. "An acid attack, sir." "The suspect has been apprehended and taken to the station. The victims are a bride and groom, both with severe burns, and are at Del City Memorial Hospital." Henry nodded and looked around. The conference room looked like a battlefield: overturned chairs, scattered flowers, bloodstains on the floor near the altar. "Does anyone know who the attacker is to the victims?" asked the detective. One of the bride's friends, still crying, approached Henry. "I don't know who she is." Hendrik seemed to call her Lucia, but Kalmina never mentioned her. Henry wrote down the information and continued questioning the witnesses. Gradually, a picture emerged. A stranger had burst into the wedding and attacked the newlyweds for no apparent reason. However, Hendrik's reaction, calling the attacker by name, indicated that he knew her. After examining the scene, Henry went to the hospital. There he learned that Hendrik's condition was critical, The acid had severely damaged his face and upper chest. Kalmina had burns on her hands and neck, but her life was not in danger. The doctors did not allow the detective to speak with the victims, so Henry went to the police station, where the suspect was being held. Lucia Brooks sat in the interrogation room, remaining calm. Her dark hair was pulled back into a casual bun, and there was no trace of the rage described by witnesses on her face. "Miss Brooks, I'm Detective Henry Morgan," he introduced himself, sitting down across from her. "Do you understand that you have committed a serious crime?" Lucia looked up, and Henry saw a strange mixture of pain and determination in her eyes. "I understand what I did, Detective, and I don't regret it. Tell me why you attacked these people." Lucia folded her hands on the table and took a deep breath. "Hendrik and I had been together for 3 years. He loved me. At least that's what he said." Henry wrote down this information. "You were in a relationship with your fiancé?" "Yes," Lucia nodded. "We met when I first moved to Del City. I work as a stylist at Amethyst Salon. Hendrik came there on a friend's recommendation." Henry watched her face, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. "Continue." Lucia closed her eyes, immersing herself in her memories. It was 3 years ago. Lucia had just started working at Aubrey Thompson's salon and was trying to make a good impression on customers. Hendrik Wilson came in late in the evening when most of the stylists had already left. He looked tired after a long day at work, but his smile transformed his stern face when he saw Lucia. "I need to freshen up before an important meeting," he said at the time. "This salon was recommended to me." Lucia remembered every detail of their first meeting. How attentively he looked at her while cutting her hair. How easily they talked about books and movies. How he left a generous tip and his business card with his work and personal phone numbers. He called the next day and invited her to dinner. Lucia hesitated. She knew that relationships could be complicated for someone like her. But Hendrik was persistent and charming. Their first date took place in a secluded restaurant on the outskirts of town. Hendrik was attentive and gallant, but Lucia noticed that he avoided crowded places in the center of Del City. "I value my privacy very much," he explained at the time. "In my profession, reputation means a lot." Lucia understood his concerns. Society still viewed relationships like theirs with prejudice. She agreed to secret meetings, content with rare but vivid moments together. The first year was filled with passion and discovery. Hendrik said he had never met anyone like her. He admired her strength and determination to be herself, despite all the difficulties. They dreamed of a future where they could be together openly. In the second year, their relationship deepened. Lucia introduced Hendrik to her friend and boss, Aubrey, who became the only person who knew about their romance. Hendrik still insisted on secrecy, explaining that he was concerned about his career and feared for Lucia's reputation. "People won't understand us," he said. "Let's wait for the right moment." The third year began with promises of change. Hendrik talked about getting a promotion and being able to move to a more progressive city where they could start a new life together. Lucia believed him and waited. Then, 2 months ago, everything changed. Hendrik began to distance himself, call less often, and cancel meetings. Lucia sensed that something was wrong, but she attributed it to work stress. The truth came out by accident. Lucia saw a photo of Hendrik with an elegant woman at a charity event on social media. The caption read, "Architect Hendrik Wilson and Dr. Kalmina Jackson announced their engagement." Lucia was devastated. She called Hendrik dozens of times until he finally answered and agreed to meet her. "It's a necessity, Lucia," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Marrying Kalmina will open doors for me that would otherwise remain closed. Her family is influential in the city. What about us? What about your promises?" Lucia asked, unable to believe her ears. "We never existed, Lucia. It was a mistake. I can't risk everything I've built for this." He uttered the word "this" with such contempt that Lucia felt physical pain. 3 years of relationship, 3 years of love and hope he dismissed with a single word. "If you tell anyone about us, I will deny everything," he added before leaving. "No one will believe you, Lucia. Remember that." Henry listened carefully to Lucia's story, noting the details. He saw before him not just a criminal, but a person experiencing a deep personal tragedy. However, that did not justify her actions. "Why did you decide to attack at the wedding?" he asked. Lucia looked at her hands. "I wanted him to feel pain. I wanted everyone to see his true colors. I wanted his fiancée to know who she had chosen." Henry closed his notebook. "Miss Brooks, you are charged with assault with a dangerous substance with intent to cause serious bodily injury. This is a serious crime." Lucia nodded. "I understand." After the interrogation, Henry sent patrol officers to Lucia's apartment with a search warrant. He needed evidence of her connection to Hendrik and confirmation of the premeditated nature of the attack. Lucia's apartment was located in a modest apartment building on the eastern edge of Del City. It was a small but neat dwelling, decorated with the taste of someone knowledgeable about design. Henry methodically inspected the rooms, noting the absence of any photos of Hendrik. If they were indeed a couple, it was strange that there were no traces of their relationship left in the house. In the bedroom, he found a half-packed suitcase. Lucia was preparing to flee after committing the crime. There were scattered items on the bed and an open laptop on the nightstand. Henry turned on the computer and saw an open page with a bus ticket reservation to Oklahoma City, departing 2 hours after the wedding. This was further evidence of her premeditation. In a dresser drawer, the detective found an old envelope. Inside were several photographs of Lucia and Hendrik together. In one photo, they were hugging in front of a lake. In another, they were sitting in a secluded restaurant. There were also more intimate photos that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Among the photos, Henry found receipts from restaurants and hotels, confirming that Hendrik and Lucia had spent time together. The most recent receipt was dated 2 months earlier, roughly when, according to Lucia, Hendrik had ended their relationship. In the bathroom, in the trash can, the detective found a receipt from a hardware store dated yesterday. The shopping list included technical acid. Henry put the receipt in an evidence bag. On the kitchen table lay an open women's magazine with an article about Hendrik and Calmina's wedding. The text described them as the perfect couple, a successful architect and a talented pediatrician from a respected family. The article mentioned that they had met at a charity event 6 months ago, and it was love at first sight. Henry photographed the article and continued his inspection. In the hallway, on a small table, he noticed several envelopes with unpaid bills and a notice of rent arrears. It seemed that Lucia was experiencing financial difficulties. In the living room, on the desk, lay a notebook with notes. The last entry was made the day before. "He can't just erase me from his life." 3 years. For 3 years I believed his promises. If I mean nothing to him, then let everyone see his true colors. Let his fiancée know who she is marrying. Henry gathered all the evidence and clues he had found. The picture of the crime was becoming clearer, but many questions still remained unanswered. Why did Hendrik break up with Lucia so abruptly? Did Calmina know about her fiancé's past? And what exactly led Lucia to take such a desperate step? With these thoughts in mind, the detective left the apartment, leaving the patrol officers to finish inventorying the seized property. Lucia Brooks had been preparing to flee, but she didn't make it in time. Now she would have to answer for her actions before the law, and Henry had to make sure that justice prevailed, no matter how complicated the story was. The Del City police station was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. News of the wedding attack had spread through the city like wildfire. Journalists were already waiting at the entrance, trying to get comments or take photos of the detainee. Detective Henry Morgan sat in his office, reviewing the evidence. Crime scene photos, witness statements, the forensic team's preliminary report on the acid's composition, everything pointed to a carefully planned attack. He tapped his pencil on the table, pondering Luce Brooks' motives. The clock showed 9 in the morning when Henry decided to continue the interrogation. He took the folder with the documents and headed for the interrogation room where Lucia was being held. She had spent the night in a holding cell, and the detective hoped that this time had given her an opportunity to realize the seriousness of her situation. Lucia sat at a metal table, looking surprisingly composed for someone whose life had just been destroyed. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back in a ponytail, and her face was completely free of makeup. She looked up when Henry entered the room. "Good morning, Miss Brooks," said the detective, sitting down across from her. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who just ruined someone else's life and her own," she replied with a bitter smile. "But that's not why you're here, is it?" Henry placed a folder in front of him and turned on the tape recorder. "Interrogation of suspect Lucia Brooks, May 25th, 9:05 a.m., he said in an official tone. "Miss Brooks, yesterday you confessed to attacking Hendrik Wilson and Kalmina Jackson during their wedding ceremony. Do you confirm this?" "Yes," Lucia nodded. "I did it." "Tell me more about your relationship with Hendrik Wilson." Lucia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We met 3 years ago at the beauty salon where I work. He came in for a haircut. We got talking, and he asked me out to dinner. At first, I refused. In my situation, it's not easy to trust people." "What do you mean?" Henry asked. "I'm a transgender woman, detective. In a small town like Del City, that doesn't make life easy. But Hendrik seemed different. He said he didn't care, that he only saw Lucia in me." Henry nodded, taking notes. "Go on." "Our relationship developed quickly. Within a month, we were inseparable, but always in secret. He never appeared with me in public in Del City. Always neighboring towns, secluded places. He explained that it was out of concern for my comfort, saying he didn't want me to face prejudice." Lucia fell silent, remembering. I believed him. He was so attentive, so caring. He gave me gifts and helped me with rent when I was having financial difficulties. We planned a future together. He promised that when he became a partner in his architecture firm, we would move to New York or Los Angeles, where we could be together openly. "How long did your relationship last?" Henry asked. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Lucia replied without hesitation. "Until the day he came and said it was over. That he was engaged to Kalmina Jackson and would soon marry her. How did you react to that news?" Lucia smiled bitterly. "At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I begged him not to do it. I reminded him of all his promises, of our plans, but he looked at me as if I were something dirty, something he regretted." Henry saw her eyes fill with tears, but she quickly pulled herself together. "He said it was an experiment, that he never took our relationship seriously, that marrying Kalmina was his real future, his chance for career growth and respect in society. And you decided to take revenge." "Not right away," Lucia shook her head. "At first I just tried to get through it. Aubrey, my boss and friend, supported me. She was the only one who knew about Hendrik and me. But then I saw their wedding announcement in a magazine. There was a photo, and they looked so happy. And there was an article that said they had met 6 months ago. 6 months. That means he was seeing both of us at the same time. He lied not only to me, but to her too." Henry made a note in his notebook. This was an important point, confirmation that Hendrik was leading a double life. "What happened after you saw the ad?" "I lost it. I called him and begged him to meet me. He agreed, but only to tell me to stay away from him and Kalmina. He threatened that if I tried to contact her or tell anyone about us, he would destroy me." "How?" "He has intimate photos of us. He said he would send them to everyone, my clients, my colleagues, that he would tell everyone that Lucia faltered, that I had deceived him by hiding who I really was. Even though that's a lie. He knew about me from the beginning." Henry nodded understandingly. Blackmail was a serious motive for desperate actions. "And then you decided to take revenge on him this way?" "I didn't plan it right away. But when I saw the wedding date, something inside me broke. I thought, how can he just erase me from his life and start a new one? How can he be happy after what he did to me? I wanted him to feel at least some of the pain he caused me, so that every time he looked in the mirror, he would remember me. Henry closed his notebook. Lucia's story sounded sincere, but he needed confirmation of her words. He decided it was time to visit the victims in the hospital. Thank you for your candor, Miss Brooks. We'll continue this conversation later. Leaving the interrogation room, Henry instructed the officer on duty to make sure Lucia was brought food and water and headed to Del City Memorial Hospital. The hospital greeted him with sterile cleanliness and the smell of antiseptic. Hendrik Wilson was on the 4th floor, in the intensive care unit. His condition was assessed as stable but serious. The acid had caused severe burns to his face, neck, and upper chest. Doctors were fighting to save his eyesight. One eye had been particularly badly affected. Before entering the ward, Henry spoke with the attending physician. "Will he be able to talk?" asked the detective. "Not for long, and with difficulty," replied the doctor. "His face is badly burned, and we're keeping him on painkillers." "But he's conscious." Henry nodded and entered the room. Hendrik was lying on a hospital bed, his face almost completely bandaged, only his eyes and mouth visible. He was hooked up to monitors and IVs. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Detective Henry Morgan. I need to ask you a few questions about the attack." Hendrik nodded weakly. "Do you know the woman who attacked you?" "Her name is Lucia Brooks." Even under the bandages, Henry could see Hendrik's face tense. "I don't know her," he croaked with difficulty. Henry took out his phone and showed him a photo of Lucia. "Are you sure?" "Witnesses claim you called her by name." Hendrik closed his eyes. "She's a client." "From the salon." "Just a client?" Henry pressed. "We have reason to believe you were in a relationship with Miss Brooks for 3 years." "That's a lie," Hendrik whispered. "She was obsessed with me. She stalked me." Henry made a note in his notebook. Hendrik denied the relationship, which contradicted Lucia's testimony and the evidence found. "Mr. Wilson, we found photographs of you together in Miss Brooks' apartment. They are of an intimate nature. Is this also part of her obsession?" Hendrik remained silent, his only visible eye darting around the room. "I can see it's difficult for you to talk," Henry said. "We'll continue this conversation when you're feeling better." "Get well soon, Mr. Wilson." Leaving Hendrik's ward, the detective headed to another wing of the hospital where Calmina Jackson was staying. Her condition was much better. The burns on her hands and neck were painful, but not life-threatening. She could speak and was fully conscious. Calmina sat in a chair by the window, her hands bandaged and red burn marks visible on her neck. Her parents sat beside her, a respectable couple in expensive clothes, with tense expressions on their faces. "Miss Jackson, I'm Detective Henry Morgan. I'd like to ask you a few questions about yesterday's incident." Dr. Jackson, Calmina's father, stepped forward. "My daughter has just been through a terrible attack. Could you please postpone the interview?" "It's okay, Dad," Calmina said quietly. "I want to help." Henry nodded gratefully. "Miss Jackson, do you know the woman who attacked you?" "Her name is Lucia Brooks." Calmina shook her head. "I've never seen her before. I didn't even know Hendrik had enemies." "What do you know about Mr. Wilson's past relationships?" Calmina frowned. "He said he had been focused on his career for the past few years. He mentioned a couple of short-lived romances, but nothing serious." Henry made a note. It seemed that Hendrik had hidden his relationship with Lucia not only from society, but also from his fiancée. "When did you meet Mr. Wilson?" 7 months ago, at a charity event. My father is on the hospital's board of trustees, and Hendrik represented the architectural firm that designed the new wing. We got talking, and he invited me to dinner. "And your relationship developed quickly?" Calmina smiled slightly, despite the pain. "Quite quickly." He proposed after 4 months. My parents were delighted. Hendrik is successful, ambitious, and comes from a good family. Henry noticed Dr. Jackson straighten up proudly at these words. Miss Jackson, did you notice anything unusual in Mr. Wilson's behavior in the weeks leading up to the wedding? Kalmina thought for a moment. He was tense, but I chalked it up to pre-wedding stress. Although, she paused. What? Henry prompted her. There was one strange thing. About a week before the wedding, I took his phone to call a taxi. There were several missed calls from an unknown number. When I asked him about it, Hendrik got very nervous. He said it was a persistent client and asked me never to answer calls from that number. Henry wrote down the information. It was probably Lucia trying to contact Hendrik. Thank you for your help, Miss Jackson. Get well soon. As Henry was about to leave, Dr. Jackson followed him into the hallway. Detective, I want this woman to receive the maximum punishment. She nearly killed my daughter and crippled her fiancé. We are investigating, Dr. Jackson. Justice will be served. I hope so, the doctor said sternly. I have connections in the prosecutor's office. I will make sure that this individual is punished to the full extent of the law. Henry just nodded, keeping a neutral expression on his face, and left the hospital. On the way to the station, he thought about the contradictions in the testimonies. Hendrik denied having a relationship with Lucia, calling her simply an obsessed client. Kalmina knew nothing about her fiancé's past, but the photographs and other evidence found in Lucia's apartment indicated that she was telling the truth about their affair. When Henry returned to the station, a surprise awaited him. Sitting in the reception area was a tall woman with bright purple hair and a determined expression on her face. Detective Morgan? She addressed him. I'm Aubrey Thompson, owner of the Amethyst Beauty Salon and a friend of Lucia's. I was told you were handling her case. Henry nodded. Let's go to my office, Miss Thompson. When they settled into the small but neat office, Aubrey got straight to the point. I came to support Lucia. And to tell you what really happened. I'm listening, Henry said, turning on the tape recorder. Lucia and Hendrik were indeed a couple for 3 years. I was the only one who knew about their relationship because Hendrik insisted on secrecy. At first, I thought he was just afraid of being judged. After all, Del City isn't the most progressive place. But over time, I realized that wasn't the only reason. What was it? His ambitions. Hendrik always talked about big plans, about a career at a prestigious architecture firm, about social status. He used Lucia, her love, her support, her body, but he never planned to build a future with her. Aubrey took her phone out of her bag. I have proof of their relationship. Photos, messages. Lucia often showed me the sweet things he wrote to her, how he promised they would be together. It was all a lie. She handed the phone to Henry, who scrolled through the photos and screenshots of their correspondence. Indeed, Hendrik's messages were full of tenderness and promises. You are my only love. Soon we will be together officially. I will never leave you. When did he break up with Lucia? Henry asked. 2 months ago. She was devastated. She stopped eating and hardly slept. I was worried about her and even suggested she see a therapist, but she refused. When did her condition change? About 3 weeks ago. She saw a wedding announcement in a magazine. Until then, I think she was still hoping that Hendrik would change his mind and come back to her. But that announcement, it was like it knocked the last bit of support out from under her. Aubrey fell silent, remembering. She tried to contact him. She called and wrote. Finally, he agreed to meet her. Lucia came back from that meeting in tears. She didn't want to talk about what had happened, but I heard her repeating, "He's threatening me. He's going to destroy me." Henry leaned forward. What exactly did she mean? Hendrik blackmailed her. He had intimate photos of them. He threatened that if she told anyone about their relationship or tried to contact Kalmina, he would send the photos to everyone, clients, colleagues, even her family in Mississippi, with whom she already had a difficult relationship because of her transition. Are you sure about that? That's a serious accusation. Absolutely sure. Lucia showed me a message from him with one of the photos and the text. Remember what will happen if you don't leave us alone. Aubrey looked genuinely upset. I'm not excusing what Lucia did. It's terrible. But you have to understand that she was pushed to the edge. Hendrik didn't just break her heart, he threatened to destroy her life if she tried to tell the truth. Henry tapped his pencil thoughtfully on the table. Miss Thompson, do you have that threatening message? It would be important evidence. Unfortunately, no. Lucia deleted it immediately. She was so scared. But I saw it with my own eyes. Henry nodded. Aubrey's words confirmed Lucia's story and gave the case a new twist. If Hendrik had indeed blackmailed Lucia, it could be considered a mitigating circumstance. Not an excuse, but an explanation for her actions. Thank you for your candor, Miss Thompson. Would you mind sending me the photos and messages from your phone? They will help with the investigation. Aubrey agreed and, after sending the materials, asked, Can I see Lucia? I'll arrange a meeting, Henry promised. But first, I need to finish gathering evidence. After Aubrey left, Henry sent a request to check Hendrik and Lucia's phone records for the past 3 months. If there really was a connection between them, it should be reflected in the calls and messages. Returning to Lucia's interrogation, Henry showed her the photos and messages provided by Aubrey. Miss Brooks, Aubrey Thompson has confirmed your story about your relationship with Hendrik Wilson. She also mentioned that after your last meeting with him, you talked about threats. Tell me more about that. Lucia pressed her lips together, clearly nervous. I didn't want to talk about it. Even now, I'm afraid. You're already facing a serious charge, Miss Brooks. It can't get any worse. But if Hendrik really did threaten you, it could affect your case. Lucia took a deep breath. After I saw the wedding announcement, I was desperate. I called him. I wrote to him. He ignored me. Finally, 2 weeks before the wedding, he agreed to meet me. I thought I could get through to him, remind him of our love. She smiled bitterly. Instead, he was cold as ice. He said I was a mistake, an experiment, that his future was with Calmina, whose family could open doors for him to Del City's high society. And then... Lucia paused. What happened then? I said I would tell Calmina the truth. That I wouldn't let him just erase me from his life and pretend we never existed. And then he showed me our photos on his phone. Intimate photos. He said that if I said a word to Calmina or anyone else, he would send them to everyone, my clients, friends, family, that everyone would find out that I was... She couldn't finish. That you're a transgender woman? Henry suggested gently. Yes. Although many people already know, it's my choice who I open up to and when. He threatened to take that choice away from me. He said that no one would believe someone like me against a respected architect from a good family. Henry saw Lucia tremble as she recalled the conversation. Do you have any evidence of these threats? Messages? Recordings? No. He was too smart for that. Everything was said in person, and I deleted the message with the photo he sent later immediately. I was so scared. Henry nodded. The story was coming together, but without concrete evidence of Hendrik's threats, it was just one person's word against another's. Miss Brooks, I understand that you've been through a lot of emotional stress, but that doesn't justify an acid attack. Do you understand that? Lucia lowered her eyes. I understand, and I am prepared to answer for my actions. But I want the truth about Hendrik to come out too, about how he used me and then threatened me to keep quiet. Henry closed his notebook. The interrogation was over, but the investigation was just getting started. Now he had to find evidence of Hendrik's threats, if they existed. It wouldn't change Lucia's guilt, but it could shed light on the true motives of everyone involved in this drama. Aubrey came by today, Henry said before leaving. She's worried about you. I'll let her visit you later. Gratitude flashed across Lucia's face. Thank you. Leaving the interrogation room, Henry headed for his desk, where the results of the phone records check were waiting for him. Looking through the report, he found numerous calls between Hendrik and Lucia over a period of 3 years, until 2 months ago, when the communication abruptly stopped. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, there was one short call from Hendrik to Lucia, probably when he agreed to meet her. This was followed by dozens of calls from Lucia, which went unanswered. This confirmed Lucia's version of their relationship and subsequent breakup. But the most important discovery was the text of the last message from Hendrik to Lucia, sent the day before their meeting. "Tomorrow at 6, the park by the lake. Come alone. And remember, if you say a word about this, you'll regret it. I have something that can ruin your life." Henry Morgan sat at his desk, immersed in studying the evidence. Hendrik's threatening message to Lucia was a key piece of the puzzle, but the detective felt he still didn't have the full picture. He rubbed his tired eyes and glanced at his watch. The hands showed 9 p.m. Most of the station staff had already gone home, leaving him alone with his thoughts and case files. Henry looked through the photos of Hendrik and Lucia again. They showed a happy couple, hugs, kisses, smiles. It was hard to believe that this relationship had ended in such violence. Something had happened, something that had turned love into hate, and Henry was determined to find out what it was. He opened Hendrik's social media accounts on his computer. The page was filled with photos with Kalmina, but they were all from the last 6 months. Before that, there were no signs of a romantic relationship, only work events, architectural projects, and business meetings. Not a single mention of Lucia. Henry decided to dig deeper. He sent a request to the bank for Hendrik's financial statements for the past 3 years. Perhaps there would be traces of his relationship with Lucia, joint accounts, gifts, payment of the rent she had mentioned. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, Henry returned to work with renewed energy. An envelope with Hendrik's bank statements was already waiting on his desk. Looking through them, the detective discovered an interesting pattern. For 2.5 years, Hendrik had been transferring an amount equivalent to half the rent for Lucia's apartment to her account every month. These payments stopped exactly 2 months ago, precisely when, according to Lucia, Hendrik ended their relationship. Even more interesting was that 6 months earlier, a new category had appeared in Hendrik's expenses: expensive restaurants, jewelry stores, gifts. Apparently, this was the period when he began dating Kalmina, while still maintaining a relationship with Lucia. Henry tapped his pencil thoughtfully on the table. The evidence pointed to Lucia's version of Hendrik's double life. But what made him break up with her so abruptly? And why did he resort to threats? The detective decided to talk to Kalmina again. Perhaps she knew more than she had initially said. He called the hospital and learned that Miss Jackson had already been discharged and was recovering at home. An hour later, Henry stood in front of an elegant mansion in the most prestigious neighborhood of Del City. The Jackson family home was a symbol of their status and wealth, a 3-story colonial-style building with a perfectly manicured garden. The door was opened by a maid who showed Henry into a spacious living room. Kalmina sat in an armchair by the window, her hands still bandaged and burn marks visible on her neck. Next to her, like a faithful guardian, sat her mother, a woman with the same aristocratic profile as her daughter, but with more severe features. "Detective Morgan," Mrs. Jackson greeted him coldly. "I hope you have a good reason for disturbing my daughter in her condition." "Mom, please," Kalmina said softly. "I agreed to this meeting myself." Henry thanked Kalmina for agreeing to talk to him and got straight to the point. "Miss Jackson, new circumstances have come to light during the investigation. We have evidence that Hendrik Wilson and Lucia Brooks were indeed in a long-term relationship for 3 years." Kalmina visibly tensed, but her face remained impassive. "That doesn't change the fact of the assault, Detective." "No, it doesn't," Henry agreed. "But it may help us understand the motives. You said that Hendrik never mentioned any serious relationships in the past." Kalmina looked at her mother as if seeking support. Mrs. Jackson nodded slightly. "Initially, yes," Kalmina finally said. But 2 weeks before the wedding, I began to suspect that he was hiding something. What exactly made you suspicious? Strange phone calls, his nervousness. Once I accidentally overheard him talking on the phone in his office. He was furious, telling someone to stay out of his life, threatening to destroy that person if they didn't leave him alone. Henry recorded this information. Carmina probably overheard Hendrik's conversation with Lucia. Did you ask him about it? Yes, but he dismissed it, saying it was a difficult client. I almost believed him, but then... Carmina fell silent, her gaze clouding over. Please continue, Henry urged her gently. The day before the wedding, I found deleted messages on his phone. He forgot to log out of his email on our shared computer. There were letters from someone named L, begging him not to get married, reminding him of some promises, and Hendrik's replies, in which he wrote terrible things. What exactly? Carmina swallowed. That she was a mistake, that he never really loved her. That if she tried to contact me, he would release some photos that would ruin her reputation. I was in shock. I didn't know what to think. Did you talk to Hendrik about it? I didn't have time. I planned to talk to him after the ceremony, at the reception. I wanted to hear his explanation before jumping to conclusions. But Carmina gestured to her bandaged hands. Henry nodded understandingly. Carmina found herself in the eye of the storm, unaware of the 3-year relationship that preceded her appearance in Hendrik's life. When I read those letters, I began to wonder if I even knew the man I was about to marry, Carmina added quietly. But it was too late to call off the wedding. All the preparations, the guests, the expectations of our families. I decided to talk to him first, to hear his side of the story. And you had no idea that L was Lucia Brooks? No, I had never heard of her. Hendrik never mentioned her name. Henry nodded thoughtfully. It seemed that Hendrik had carefully hidden his relationship with Lucia from everyone, including his fiancée. But why was he so afraid that the truth would come out? What threatened his career and reputation so much that he resorted to blackmail? After leaving the Jacksons' mansion, Henry decided to pay another visit to the hospital. Hendrik's condition had improved, and the doctors allowed for a longer conversation. Hendrik was reclining in his hospital bed, his face still mostly bandaged, but he was able to speak more freely. When Henry entered the room, Hendrik visibly tensed up. "Mr. Wilson, I have some new questions for you," Henry began without preamble. "We have evidence of your relationship with Lucia Brooks over the past 3 years. Bank transfers, photographs, messages. Why did you lie and say you didn't know her?" Hendrik remained silent, his only visible eye darting around the room, avoiding the detective's gaze. "In addition," Henry continued, "we have evidence that you threatened Miss Brooks. You blackmailed her with intimate photographs to keep her silent about your relationship." "You don't understand," Hendrik finally croaked. "My career, my reputation." "What exactly don't I understand, Mr. Wilson? Why would a relationship with Lucia be so damaging to your reputation?" Hendrik closed his eye, as if in despair. "You know who she is. What she is. I'm an architect. I work with conservative clients, with church organizations. If they found out that I was dating a transgender woman, it would destroy everything I've built." Henry felt a growing revulsion, but he maintained his professional composure. "So you dated her secretly for 3 years, and then dumped her to marry the daughter of an influential doctor?" "I never promised her a future," Hendrik defended himself. "She knew what she was getting into. Judging by the messages we found, you promised her a lot, Mr. Wilson. You talked about a future together, about moving to another city where you could be together openly." Hendrik turned away. "I said what she wanted to hear. And then you threatened her to keep her quiet about your relationship. That's not just a lie, Mr. Wilson. It's blackmail, and you could get real time for that." "She threw acid on me," Hendrik snapped. "She disfigured me for life." "And you're worried about some messages?" "I'm concerned about justice, Mr. Wilson. What Miss Brooks did is unforgivable. But what you've been doing for the past 3 years, using a woman who loved you and then threatening to destroy her life if she told the truth, also deserves punishment. Hendrik was silent, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "She was my mistake," he whispered finally. "I got confused, let it go too far. When the opportunity to marry Calmine came up, I saw a chance to start a normal life, to build a real family. Didn't I have a right to that?" "You did," Henry nodded, "but not at the cost of another person's life and reputation." Leaving the hospital, Henry felt a heaviness in his heart. This case was no longer a simple acid attack. It had turned into a story of manipulation, lies, and betrayal, about a man who used and discarded another, then tried to erase all traces of his mistake with threats and blackmail. Over the next few days, Henry gathered all the necessary evidence and prepared a report for the prosecutor's office. He included not only the details of Lucia's attack at the wedding, but also the history of her relationship with Hendrik, evidence of his threats and blackmail. Lucia fully admitted her guilt in the attack. She did not try to avoid punishment, but wanted the truth about Hendrik to come out as well. The prosecutor's office charged Lucia with assault with a dangerous substance, with intent to cause serious harm. She faced up to 15 years in prison. At the same time, Hendrik was charged with blackmail and threats, less serious crimes, but also punishable by imprisonment. The case caused a stir in the small town of Del City. Society was divided between those who saw Lucia as nothing more than a criminal and those who began to understand the complexity of the situation. The story of a 3-year secret relationship, betrayal, and blackmail made many people think about hidden prejudices and double standards. The trial of Lucia Brooks began exactly 1 month after the attack. The courtroom was full. It seemed as if the whole town wanted to see the outcome of this drama. Lucia sat at the defense table, dressed in a strict dark blue suit. Her face was pale but determined. Next to her was her court-appointed lawyer, who had managed to gather a lot of evidence in her favor. On the witness stand was Aubrey Thompson, who spoke about Lucia and Hendrik's 3-year relationship, how Hendrik swore his love for her and then abandoned her for a lucrative marriage, how he threatened and blackmailed her when she wanted to tell the truth. Henry Morgan also testified as the lead detective on the case. He presented all the evidence gathered to the court: bank transfers from Hendrik to Lucia, photographs, messages, and threatening text messages. To the surprise of many, Calmina Jackson also testified in court. Her hands had healed, but the burns on her neck were still visible. She recounted how she had discovered Hendrik's strange correspondence the day before the wedding, how she had planned to talk to him after the ceremony, but had not had time. "I don't condone Miss Brooks' actions," Calmina said, looking directly at Lucia. "What she did is unforgivable, but I understand her pain. Hendrik lied to both of us. He used her for 3 years and then planned to use me and my family to advance his career. We were both victims of his manipulation. Hendrik himself was not present at the hearing due to his health, but his written testimony was read out in court. In it, he continued to insist that he had never promised Lucia a serious relationship, that she knew about the temporary nature of their connection. However, the evidence suggested otherwise. When it was Lucia's turn to speak, the courtroom fell silent. She stood up, straightened her shoulders, and began to speak in a firm voice. "I am not asking for leniency, Your Honor. I have done a terrible thing, and am prepared to face the consequences. Nothing justifies violence, not even the pain I have experienced. I regret what I have done, especially the harm I caused to Calmine Jackson, who did nothing wrong to me." Lucia paused for a moment, holding back her emotions. "But I also want everyone to know the truth. For 3 years, Hendrik Wilson told me he loved me, that we would be together, that he was proud of me. And then he threw me out of his life like something shameful and threatened to destroy me if I told the truth. I lost myself in pain and despair. That's not an excuse, but an explanation. After a lengthy deliberation, The judge handed down his verdict. Lucia Brooks was found guilty of assault with a dangerous substance, but due to mitigating circumstances, psychological pressure, threats, and blackmail on Hendrick's part, she received 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. Hendrick Wilson was found guilty of blackmail and threats and sentenced to 3 years probation and a large fine. Leaving the courtroom, Henry Morgan pondered justice. He had conducted dozens of investigations and seen many crimes and their consequences, but rarely had he faced such a complex moral dilemma. Lucia committed a crime and received her deserved punishment. But was she the only one to blame in this story? Wasn't Hendrick, with his lies, manipulations, and threats, also a criminal, just of a different kind? And who ultimately suffered more? He who was physically injured, or Lucia, whose life, freedom, and dignity were destroyed even before she picked up the bottle of acid? The detective knew he would never find clear answers to these questions. In some stories, there are no absolutely right or absolutely wrong people. There are only people, their choices, and the consequences of those choices. Henry looked up at the sky. The storm clouds had parted, letting the sun's rays through. Just as the truth, no matter how painful, always finds its way through lies and secrets. That was his job, to find that truth, no matter how difficult and uncomfortable it might be. Perhaps that was what true justice was all about, not punishment, but truth, so that everyone involved in this story could see and acknowledge their role in the tragedy, their mistakes, and their consequences. And perhaps that realization was the path to healing, not only of physical wounds, but also of emotional ones.